Gerard, long-term parking.
Okay, I'll try to keep my presentation brief, given the hour already. Kind of want to give an update on where we were with the long-term parking committee, and I have two recommendations coming from the committee for council tonight. Certainly, and reference has been made already tonight about our work session last week with the business owners and how parking did come out as a theme. I don't think it was a surprise to anyone on council or in the audience. We have been working on parking over the last few years, and I look forward to working with the committee and with the business owners to continue to make progress. And I think we have made some progress. Actually, I pulled out some recommendations and a plan that we put forward back in 2008. And I think we've done many of the things on that list of recommendations, including increased signage, providing the 15-minute parking spots, some additional education and other aspects of the assessment of parking within Newtown Borough. There are actually a couple of things that are on here. One is parking enforcement, and that's one of the topics I would like to talk about tonight that we didn't get to on our original list. And you may recall earlier this year, Julia, you tasked me with working with the parking committee again to address some concerns that residents had in the immediate business, next to the business district on South State Street, about the ability to have parking on the street because it was observed that a lot of the spots get taken up by employees of the businesses and so forth, so the parking is somewhat limited in the area immediately or surrounding that South State Street Business District. The committee has been working really hard over the past few months on this topic, and as you know, there is actually a draft ordinance around a potential to have a residents-only parking, unlimited residents-only parking, and a restriction on non-resident parking in certain areas of that part of the borough, namely Court, Center, Mercer, and Penn. One of the things that the committee considered about that ordinance before we asked it to be moved forward was what it would take for additional enforcement. And I know the chief raised some concerns about the ability for the existing force to enforce that. And so that got the committee speaking again about enforcement and kind of went back to some of the discussion we had back in 2008, ironically. Like I said, I want to bring forward sort of the latest thinking of the committee and sort of a stepwise progression on attacking some of the issues that we face in parking. It is sort of an interdependent system. You have inherent supply of parking spaces, and that is at times limited. You have regulation about who can use which spots for how long, and you have enforcement, and they're all related. And that a lot of our discussions at committee tend to get back to one of those three buckets. One of the things on the on those three sort of areas of the system we hopefully will be addressing tonight is the actually adding to the supply of parking spots that the borough controls by a potential lease of the parking lot behind 10 Center, and that has 76 spots, and the long-term parking committee has been discussing how best to utilize those spots primarily for the use by employees. And we think that if those spots are in fact utilized by the businesses for employee parking, that will relieve some of the stresses on the neighborhoods in town close to the business district, and so that should help. And the other component, quite frankly, is enforcement and our ability to enforce the restrictions we have in place today. We had two officers at our last meeting, and I've been talking with Chief Tony, and have had some good discussions about enforcement and about potential improvement to the way we enforce. So tonight, the sort of stepwise approach that I think the committee endorses, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul and Lauren, I know you're both here, is let's indeed move forward to increase the supply by, albeit a temporary lease on the lot behind Penn Center, and also to move forward with a proposal to have a part-time police officer dedicated to parking enforcement. And then the third piece about the residential parking in the area that we had discussed previously, I would think that we once we put the two pieces in place initially, we can determine how effective those two components of the system are, and to see if, in fact, we actually even need to have further restrictions in that area. So the suggestion is to hold off for now on that ordinance, but to put the other two pieces in place. And I know later in today's agenda we're going to be talking about the lease behind Penn Center. So for this discussion, I'd like to talk a bit about the enforcement piece. And I asked Marcia to distribute some data on that the committee used at our last meeting, and to describe what the costs would be as I search for it. Thank you. The cost for additional parking enforcement and hiring a part-time officer, the hourly rate, the number of hours per day, which would be 8 hours a day for 4 days a week, and what that would mean in terms of impact to the budget. Again, we've had a lot of discussion about budget tonight, and I know our current line item for part-time police officers is now at mid-year. We are below, I think, where we said we would be. Yeah. There is some room in the part-time officer line. So the idea is, if in fact we do, and the recommendation is to work with the chief to have a dedicated part-time officer, really monitor to see what the impact is to the cost side to the borough in terms of how much this is costing us, as well as if the history or the number of parking citations changes because of having a dedicated personnel to that task. Many other communities have dedicated personnel to assist in monitoring parking and restricted parking. So, and I also on the sheet gave you sort of the parking citation history for 2009, 10, and the first half of 2011. And again, the source was the chief. So we would like to recommend to in fact put a part-time officer in place to be dedicated to parking enforcement. So that's the recommendation. First of all, was there any questions on the data I provided?
Since the audience doesn't have this data in front of them, do you want to give some kind of a brief overview of the
Sure.
number of citations and how it all adds up?
So it's been amazingly consistent. The records with the new CODI system started in 2009. So we have from April 1st to December 31st of 2009, where there were 752 citations written. That turns out to be a monthly average of 83.6. In 2010, there was per month on average number of citations. In 2010, for the full year, there was 960 citations written, monthly average of about 80, so very close to the monthly average the year before. And so far in 2011, from January 1st to June 30th, there was 493 citations, monthly average 82.2. So we're in that 83 kind of range. Talking about the cost of parking enforcement, a rough range would be on a monthly basis, approximately $2,300 to $2,500 to have a part-time officer dedicated to parking enforcement, and that would mean that would be a person dedicated to enforcing the municipal lots and State Street.
So the assumption is if somebody were dedicated that they would be the citations would pay for the officer, essentially. That's the feeling.
I think that remains to be tested.
Right.
And I think it's worth testing. We heard from our business owners last week that parking is an issue, and I think we've talked about enforcement over the past couple of years of addressing it, and I think we should take a step to at least pilot a program for dedicated enforcement. And I think if we find it's cost prohibitive, then we reevaluate after 3 months or so.
And it would seem that even if it doesn't, the cost or the revenues from issuing additional parking citations doesn't directly cover the cost of the additional officer. There's some indirect savings in that the other officers on duty, or who would otherwise be on duty, who may not be on duty, are freed up from.
Exactly. So there's an
additional
opportunity
citations.
cost right now that we're paying for our officers actually writing or parking citations. And there's also the added benefit of having police presence in the business district while they're doing this.
I did chat with Chief Tony earlier today regarding the data, and I think my interpretation of this is this represents what we do today in terms of ticket volume and the fines associated with that ticket volume. I think what you're suggesting is let's test the waters with assigning a part-time officer to do this test for 90 days, whatever the case may be, without the expansion into the areas of concern. My question to Tony was, if we do this, how many more tickets are we going to write? Okay, are we going to cover the costs, regardless of whether it's in the budget or not, under the part-time expense category? Will we be writing that many more tickets with a dedicated officer to accomplish this? In deference to your observation, Perry, about whether or not we would be relieving any of the other officers from doing this, Tony's comment was no. It's the officer's responsibility. If they see a violation and they, in fact, can write a ticket, they're going to continue to write tickets. So we're going to get an idea as to the value of a part-time officer 8 hours a day, 4 days a week, to see if the parking enforcement activities increases in some proportion to the existing data that we have, and try and justify the costs of adding a full-time or a part-time officer into next year's budget. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
And that'll help us then make the decision as to whether or not we would pass the ordinance in the Court Street area to alleviate or better manage the parking scenario. But it still tells me that we'd have to generate twice the amount of revenue to take care of N number of streets. And I just can't get there from here. This all started out with Tony making a recommendation that we need to solve the problem on Court Street, and there's 8 spots there, and if I've got to take care of 8 more spots, I can do it with the existing staff. So I'm struggling to get to the point of saying, why do I want to spend another between $27,000 and $30,000 to take care of what was originally 8 spots, because it has grown beyond that. We now have other streets that we're going to be putting permit parking in. So his feedback to us has been, if I've got to cover more territory in that Court Street area, I've got to have resources to do that. I also went back recently and looked at our police budget, which represents 50% of the overall expenses of the borough. In 2003, it was like $365,000, $370,000. It's now double that in 2011. So, are we going to be doubling our police expenses? And what are we really getting for that if we, in fact, consider adding an officer to enforce what Tony calls not a parking problem, but an employee problem, because we can manage the parking situation, but if employees continue to ignore where they're supposed to park, we're never going to solve the problem. So I'm not convinced that spending $30,000 or some portion of $30,000 this year and $30,000 next year is going to solve the problem as we perceive it. And what do we do at the end of 1 year when we lose those 76 spots if Allen's development goes forward? I mean, where are we going to send those 76 people? We may move the problem, but we're not solving the problem, and it might cost us $30,000 to find out we can't solve the problem. So they're my quick observations, and I just saw this morning, and you and I haven't had a chance to talk about it. But I think it's an expense that we really have to look hard at. I'm not opposed to trying it to see what it delivers, but I'm only cautiously optimistic about it.